What if you could lead more effectively and go home on time? Welcome to the Lightbulb. I'm Zoe Thompson, leadership and performance coach, and each week I bring you 3 practical insights from my work helping impact-driven leaders transform from reactive to intentional leadership so they can finish work on time and take guilt-free time off, creating success that feels as good as it looks. Let's jump in. Welcome back. And this is episode 3. I'm going to talk pressure tests, responses, and personal operating manuals. So wherever you are in the world listening in, I hope you are well. And here are my 3 light bulbs from this week. So it's been a slightly different week for me this week. In the early hours of Monday morning, and I'm talking 3 a.m. Monday morning, I set off for the airport with the Bristol Flyers basketball team heading to Croatia. So we compete in the UK League, but we also compete in the Northern European League as well. So we had a game in Croatia and we were heading out on Monday morning. The game was on Tuesday and then we came back on Wednesday. So I really didn't want to do too much work while I was out there. So I didn't have any client calls booked in or anything like that. But I did have a few bits that I took with me to be able to do for when there was a bit of downtime and there weren't any plans, which was probably just as well, because we actually weren't allowed to leave the hotel and had a police escort the majority of the time that we were there. So we were advised not to leave the hotel. So actually having a few bits and a good book kept me occupied when we weren't training, hanging out as a team, and obviously the game, which we won, by the way. So that was all good. So slightly different week in terms of pulling together my light bulbs. I did still have a couple of client calls when I came back on Thursday, and Friday was set aside to do some business development work. And on Saturday, got together with the Bristol Young Heroes, which are the young people that I do some support work with. So whilst I talk about leadership in the day-to-day world, when I'm working with young people, we really tap into the self-leadership, which, as you'll know, is a huge skill set to have at that early age. So that's been my week. So this week in the blueprint call, which was on Wednesday evening, and actually our final official week of the program, although we will have an extra week to check in on everybody next week, just to do a wrap up, see where people are at, give people a week to catch up on any elements that they either want to repeat or elements that they've missed out on. So this week, we talked about creating their own blueprint. So I teach a lot of frameworks, a lot of mechanisms. We talk about a lot on the program. And the important thing for me is that when they walk away from the program, they create their own blueprint. They create their own operating system that's going to work for them. So I always talk about take the principle, not the plan, because if we take the principle rather than trying to follow the model in exactly the same way, we know then that it's going to work for us. We're adapting those models, we're adapting the frameworks and mechanisms to help them to work for us. So this week we talked in the call around some of the mechanisms that they've been using, but really being able to test them under pressure. So one person was moving offices, somebody had an assessment in their workplace, and I also tested my own systems and structure this week with traveling and being away and really testing myself to want to be able to leave work behind as much as possible, and really checking in with what I was taking out of habit, because that's what I've always done, and what I was taking out of choice, because that's how I wanted to do it. So we talked about having systems that are in place that really still work for us when we're under pressure. And a lot of the time, conversations that I have with clients is making sure that we set ourselves a system and a routine that we can do in our busiest week. So then we set ourselves up to succeed rather than setting ourselves up to fail, because most weeks aren't great, perfect weeks. They're not slow weeks with lots of time, lots of energy. It's very normal for us to have busy weeks, additional demands, unexpected things coming in, weeks where we don't sleep as much, weeks where we don't have as much energy. And so actually building a system that works when we're exhausted or when we're out of routine or where there's chaos means that we've got a system that works. If it works at its worst, it's going to work at its best. So that's what we've been talking about this week. So think about your own productivity system. Is it set up to succeed? Because if it only works when everything's going perfectly, you don't have a system, you just have this set of ideal conditions. And what we want to make sure is that we've got those foundations that are solid, that work, and they hold even when there's chaos, even when there's office moves, and even when you are awake till 1 o'clock in the morning celebrating winning your game in Croatia, when you've got to be at the airport at 9 o'clock the next morning. You want a system that fits and works for you, not for everybody else, but for you. And it works at its worst and it works at its best. So that's perhaps something for you also to think about going into this next week. So the second thing I wanted to talk about was reaction versus response. So spending a couple of days with professional athletes, you're really able, especially behind the scenes like that, you're really able to look to see how the guys respond to the different pressure in different ways. And I have talked in different posts this week about how they'll rest, how they make sure that they have that downtime, how they have those set periods of times where they lock in to watch the other team, to lock in to see what they need to do when they're on the court. But we also talk about pressure, and this was a big game. So it was a big game for a couple of reasons. One, that we need to win. We want to win. We also need to win. But secondly, the team that we were playing in Croatia have just qualified to play in this league. So it's their first game in the European competition. And if you know anything about basketball, you'll know that Eastern Europe, Croatia, they take basketball very seriously. It's more popular than football, pretty much like a religion for them. They take it very seriously. And they also have ultra fans. So the atmosphere is very much like a football game, not necessarily some of the games here in the UK, but they have ultra fans. So there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of chanting, and it can be perceived as hostile energy. For me personally, I didn't understand what they were saying, so I didn't find it threatening in any way, but I certainly would say that you could certainly describe it as intimidating. There was drums, there was chanting, there was a lot of shouting. But it was interesting that whilst some people commented that it was overwhelming, actually for the team, a lot of them found that it really fueled their energy. And so they had a completely different response to it. So one of the things that we talked about, and I talked about this in the newsletter this week, is E plus R equals O. You might have heard of this. So it's event plus the response equals your outcome. So we all experienced the same event. We were all in the same location. We were all in the same situation. We were all with the same team. But how we respond to that would result in the outcome, in how we think, how we feel, and how we respond. Now, I talk about this a lot. So if you've been in my world for a little while, you'll know that I talk about those beliefs and how our beliefs, our frame of reference, impacts how we think, how we feel, and how we respond. And that then influences the outcome. So there was nothing we could do about the crowd. Absolutely nothing. Not in our control. There wasn't anything that we could do to either control it or to influence it. But there was a choice. There was a choice to use that as fuel, to use that atmosphere as something that would elevate them, something that would make them step up. They chose, rather than fear, they chose to use that adrenaline response, to use it for hyper-focus and really tap into that competitive mindset. And it's the same for us in day-to-day life. We can all experience the same event. How we respond, how we choose to respond, will impact the outcome. So the beliefs that we hold, our mindset, the frame of reference that we filter the events through, that impacts how we think and how we feel and how we respond. And that will often influence the outcome. And it's the same for us day to day. It's the same for us in leadership. We can't control the event, but we can control how we respond. And our stakeholders, our team, the deadlines, the pressures, when your team are in crisis mode, those events and how you respond will influence the outcome. So you can't control those difficult stakeholders, you can't control the unexpected crises, you can't control the impossible deadlines or those demands, but what you can control is whether you react, whether you are reactive, or whether you are more intentional in how you respond. And again, this is another example of the difference between reactive leadership and intentional leadership. It's exactly what our pro and elite athletes do. It's exactly what we can apply in leadership as well. So my third and final light bulb for the week links back into the first one, and that's creating your own personal operating model. Now, there's a lot of very generic frameworks. There's a lot of leadership models, different behavior models that you can use. But they are very generic. They are based on research, but they are written to apply to everybody. So when we're looking at our own personal blueprint, whether it's for us as an individual or us as a leader, we want to follow the principle and not the plan. So when I share my frameworks with clients, I don't tell them that they need to follow the frameworks exactly, because firstly, not every framework is going to apply and be fit for purpose for everybody. But secondly, we need to adapt these models and these frameworks to how we work, how our brain works. So we want to make sure that when we look at different behavior models, different leadership models, different mechanisms and time management tools, anything like that, think about how you need to adapt that to make it fit for you, to make it fit for purpose. Take the principle, not the plan. So you don't need to follow it step by step. So one of the things that we talked about this week is the 3 Ps. Technically 4 Ps, but a lot of people tend to call it the 3 Ps. So this helps you to be more intentional. So again, moving from reactive leadership to intentional leadership, the 3 Ps can really help with that. So the first one is to pause, because sometimes we just need to take a moment and make a decision about how we want to move forward. And if we don't take that pause, we will quite often find that it's a reaction rather than a response. And quite often that reaction isn't helpful. So that pause is really important. Next, we want to prioritize. So we want to ask ourselves the question of what's most important here. What's most important in terms of how I respond? What's most important in terms of the action that needs to be taken? And what do I need to prioritize that is going to help influence the best possible outcome? So we can't always control it, but we can influence it. So really taking that moment, so the pause, to prioritize what is most important. Then we can proceed with purpose. Now, as I said at the beginning, I have always called it the 4 Ps when I created it to help for myself, but also to help my clients. I created it as 4 Ps: pause, prioritize, proceed with purpose. And actually, for a lot of people who are using it and how they now refer to it, is the 3 Ps. I pause, I prioritize, I proceed. The purpose element falls in with the prioritization. So for them, they don't need to follow it step by step by step. They just need to remind themselves 3 Ps. They pause, they prioritize, and then they proceed. We've been working together for 8 weeks. the majority of them now, the ones that are using this because it's helpful to them, they're not going through the step-by-step of the 3Ps. They've taken the principle, pause, take a moment, ask what's most important, and then move forward. So they're not using the 3Ps in the way that I shared it with them. They're using it in a way that works for them. So when we understand the principles behind the frameworks and the mechanisms and the models, when we understand the why, then we can adapt the how to make it work for us. So the most successful systems match our own approaches. They match our own working style, not somebody else's. So in particular, when we talk about neurodiversity, we want to make sure that actually something that works for one person can be adapted to work for the next person. So if you're trying to force yourself into what you are seeing works really well for somebody else, you're fighting potentially against how your brain likes to work and a system that would work best for you. So it's really important to create your own personal operating manual, adapt frameworks, adapt models, adapt mechanisms to your own style, because that's what's going to make your new habits stick permanently. And it's also going to be what helps you to become less reactive and more intentional. So those are my 3 light bulbs from this week. I would love to hear how those have landed with you, what's resonated, what train of thought that might have sparked for you. I would love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to share. It's always lovely to hear from you. And I will call it there for this week. Have a great week ahead, and I will see you again for the next episode. And those are your 3 takeaways for this week. Before you go, ask yourself, what's my light bulb moment from this? And now that I know what I know, what will I do differently? Choose one action, however small, and commit to it. That's how overwhelmed and reactive becomes aligned and intentional. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next week on the next episode of The Lightbulb.